right, it is 3 o'clock here on the East Coast, so let's go ahead and get started as people trickle in. Thank you all for joining Environment America for today's webinar on solar permitting, best practices for encouraging rooftop solar. My name is Emma Searson. I'm the Go Solar Campaign Director here at Environment America. And I will get to the next slide here. I want to give a brief introduction to Environment America's Go Solar campaign, just to kick things off today, and the topic of today's webinar, which is the permitting process for small rooftop solar installations. Then we will hear from Richard Lawrence, the Program Director at the Solar Foundation, on one key resource for cities interested in improving their solar permitting processes, SolSmart, and what exactly an ideal permitting process should look like. Finally, Karen Banker, Public Policy Manager with Sunrun, is here to tell us about another permitting resource that is exciting and currently in development called the Solar App. And then we'll have plenty of time at the end of this webinar for questions and discussion. So feel free to jot down questions in the chat box as you think of them, or just hold on to them to the end. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and start with a quick introduction to Environment America's Go Solar campaign. So the goal of our Go Solar campaign is to defend and advance solar policy at the local, the state, and the federal levels. So we do this along with a network of state organizations with staff in over 20 states working on solar and renewable energy. We do research, public engagement, policy development, advocacy, media work, and also partner with many other organizations to accomplish that goal. So some of you may know us for our Mayors for Solar Energy project, or for the Shining Cities reports that we produce each year, ranking major US cities by how much solar energy they have installed. And we also just recently put out a report on the true value of solar energy for the grid, environment, and society. So all of those projects, as well as this webinar series, are a part of the work we're doing to further solar energy at the municipal level through our Go Solar campaign. And there are several reasons that we have chosen to focus on renewable energy among solar energy among all of our renewable energy efforts. First and foremost, solar energy is pollution-free, doesn't emit global warming emissions or other dangerous emissions for human health, and that's really important for us as an environmental organization. Solar energy is also virtually limitless. We're nowhere close to using all of it. And it's getting more and more affordable because of that every day. This quick chart just shows the US annual electricity consumption, that's the bottom right circle in red, versus the yellow and orange circles, which represent the potential for solar energy in the US. Enough sunlight hits the US each year to power our electricity needs more than 100 times over. So saying we have plenty of it is kind of an understatement. A couple other reasons we're big solar energy fans. One is that solar energy is very popular. It regularly polls as one of the most popular energy sources, ranging between 80 to 90% approval ratings, and it enjoys that kind of support across party lines and with folks who wouldn't necessarily consider themselves to be environmentalists. So it's really good for getting a lot of people on board. Solar is also a tangible and transformative energy source. People can see it on their neighborhoods, on their kids' schools. And when you install solar on your home or your business, you're really transforming the way you experience energy and generating it yourself and understanding how that impacts your bill. And we find that to be a transformative experience. Solar is also easy to deploy at any scale, whether it's on one small rooftop, on big commercial buildings, or in major utility scale farms, and all of those can be beneficial. And finally, solar offers community benefits at the local level, from job creation to helping save money for residents, businesses, and governments, to building a more resilient and efficient energy grid. It's quite a long list, but those are just a couple examples. And with millions of rooftops available in our cities and all of the necessary infrastructure that we need to go solar already in place, America's cities really have a golden opportunity to be leaders in the transition to renewable energy through solar. And many are already taking advantage of that opportunity. This is a map from our latest Shining Cities report showing major US cities that have the most installed solar capacity, just as an example. But it is still the case that most cities have only begun to tap their full solar energy potential. And we know that local governments can drive further solar development through effective policies and programs. Part of our mission is to provide the tools and resources and peer learning opportunities that can help make that happen. So this Mayors for Energy webinar series is one example. We also have a toolkit called 10 Ways Your Community Can Go Solar that offers a series of guides cities can use to adopt more clean and renewable energy. And today we're going to dive into one of the tips covered in that guide. And that is essentially to eliminate as much red tape as possible in the solar permitting process to encourage local development. We've got two experts here in solar permitting today to help us dive into the details. So I'll just start with a really quick intro to why this is an important issue in the first place. So first of all, friendly permitting and zoning processes can help clear the way for solar energy growth. We know that homeowners and businesses interested in installing solar projects often have to jump through a lot of hoops, from zoning revision applications to really cumbersome permitting processes with multiple inspections and expensive applications. And all of that red tape can act as an obstacle. It can make it too difficult, too time-consuming, and too expensive for many to make the transition to solar energy. So while permitting laws do include important protections for public safety, cities should make sure that they don't unnecessarily slow or restrict solar energy development. Instead, cities can actually eliminate those barriers to going solar by coming up with really expedited permitting processes, making sure their fees are reasonable, and making all their policies really clear and accessible. So those are some of the steps we're going to talk about today. And taking those steps can help reduce the soft costs associated with new solar projects. That just means the non-hardware costs that come from things like permit applications and fees. And doing that is really impactful. More efficient approval processes can save local governments time and money in doing the labor of reviewing those applications. And since soft costs can make up about 2/3 of a homeowner's costs of installing a residential solar project, and inefficient permitting processes alone can add up to $2,500 to the price tag of a residential solar project, a streamlined project can save customers a lot of money and make it a more affordable option for more residents and businesses to explore. And improving local processes for going solar can also grow a local solar economy. A lot of solar installers will avoid working in communities where permitting is difficult. So you can actually attract more solar businesses with a more friendly regulatory environment that supports their work. And then finally, having an easy and approachable process in which all the necessary steps and fees are transparent and easy to find, make it a lot more likely that residents and businesses who are thinking about going solar will actually move forward so that your community can reach more ambitious energy goals in less time. So it's definitely a really important thing to be considering. That is essentially all of the introduction I want to give. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute folks here and give Richard the floor so that he can go ahead and tell us more about solar permitting processes and the SolSmart program. So I think we have a little bit of an echo that I'm going to work on, but Richard, you are good to go ahead.
Hold on, echo might be on my side. Let me try to address that by muting here.
You sound great.
Okay. No.
Got it. I think we got it fixed, Richard, if you want to go ahead.
All right, there we go. Thank you. And happy to talk today about the SolSmart program and then go in a little bit more about solar permitting best practices that are recommended to this program. This will lead into the discussion that Karen Banker will lead with the Solar App program, which Solar Foundation is also one of the leaders on that effort. So we'll progress you through here in the different stages. So start off, introduction to SolSmart. You want to hit the next page there. So SolSmart is a program that has been running for several years now, supported by the Department of Energy. The Solar Foundation is the technical assistance provider of this program through this award. And we are doing this whole project in coordination with the International City County Managers Association, ICMA, who helps manage the designation program as well. So it's a real joint effort between the two entities here. And the goals of the project are to make it, like I said, faster, easier, and more affordable for more Americans to go solar. So what we do is we work with the local governments to help streamline their processes, make the community in general more favorable for solar installations, attract that solar business, and basically demonstrate that they're supportive and they want to grow that in their local region. They want to grow more solar. There are different categories of the designation, so we'll walk briefly through this. There's different categories that you can get points for in the award, and you can then earn, based on the number of points, designation levels of bronze, silver, or gold. Each of those steps also has a couple of required items that must be met to meet each of the levels, and then within each category there's a variety of ways of earning other points. So it's in some ways similar to like the LEED process for a building or other thing like that, where you've got different tiers that you can qualify for. You have some required things that need to be met, and then you get points based on other options that are available to you. Through the process currently, through the Department of Energy, we have technical assistance available in each of these categories, both through staff of the Solar Foundation. We have regional technical advisors that support the communities going through the process, and then also we have some more technical level, code experts that can help in some of the other policy and code related stuff that you might run into as you start looking at implementing some of the recommendations. So we still have that for a little bit more than another year left on the project. So if you're interested in SolSmart, definitely want to get started on that now while we still have that free technical assistance available. All right, next slide. The goal is to get at least 300 communities. We're actually, with a level of designation, we're actually getting pretty close to that point now. So that's great. We're very confident we'll be meeting that goal. And also, one of the things we're looking at now is making sure we have good geographic distribution. We think we've done that so far. We have designees in over 38 states. We're trying to get one in at least every continental state at this point, and we're pretty close to that. We're getting prepped for our announcement around the 300th designation as soon as that comes sometime this year. So maybe it will be someone on this call. All right, go next slide. So these are the main categories of criteria that are covered under the SolSmart designation. And again, in each of these categories, there are a number of different things that you can get points for. We'll focus on the permitting today, but there's many other areas that a community can engage in becoming more solar friendly. this gets into one of the big areas. Oh, sorry, go back to that. The planning, zoning, and development regulations are a big one. There's definitely best practice recommendations there. Plenty to talk about of that, which would include some things like solar rights, so access to the sun from different areas, so preventing a shading on your location. Lots of stuff on inspections, which would follow up on the permitting process, and how to streamline that inspection process and make sure that the work that has been permitted has been installed well. You want to make sure you're on you're applying applicable codes and have clear guidance on which ones we recommend updating to the latest codes as soon as possible there, and to ensure that they are matching where the industry is. As code cycles regularly, so want to make sure that that's on track with the most recent additions. We know that can be challenging when it's adopted at the state level, but there's other things then that the community, or the jurisdiction can do to engage the community. This would include things like maybe running a solarized campaign, supporting that. Other ways to encourage the finance of systems, partnerships that can be entered with local banks and things. And then also, like I said, engaging the utilities to make sure that they know that you're interested in this. Sometimes as you start to get into larger penetrations of solar in an area, the utility starts to become more concerned and more engaged in where the solar is going to be sited and how it's going to be developed. Make sure that the grid can handle the solar that is being put on there. And then we have another broad category for innovative actions. So that's kind of open to a number of different things to get points for. So things that maybe aren't covered in the other areas. All right, go ahead into next slide. As I said, everybody who goes through the process currently and starts looking at these different criteria and meeting the steps that are needed there can get some technical assistance from us. We've got some of the foremost experts in the field on things like the permitting and inspection process, and how to help you through if you have particular examples of systems that are being proposed and you don't know what to do with them. We can give you some advice on that, but also it's really focused on how do you meet the criteria to get the designation. So we want to help you do that and are able to provide that assistance for you there. Okay, go ahead. So we encourage you to join, to take a look at, visit solsmart.org, and on that site you will find, the full list of the criteria, what's covered, how do you get points. You can start to take a look at how close you are already. We obviously encourage communities to stretch and reach that next level. You may already be at bronze or just need to do a couple of easy steps to get there. But we want to see if you can then do a little bit more work and move up to that next level and get a silver or gold designation. And there's some technical context for Toya. She's our main project manager now on SolSmart. We've got a number of other staff to work on this program, but we can get you started. Visit the website, download the guide, take a look at it, and there's a easy button to request any more information or start your application process. You can't apply without getting technical assistance. You go through it yourself, and certainly as we move into the after next year, there will be different methods of applying for and getting that after the funding for the technical assistance has run out here. So encourage you to start today. Okay, next slide. So we'll go a little bit more now into the permitting of solar, a little bit of the criteria that we have around that and how you get points for those implementing those actions and related to permitting process, and then talk a bit more about the current sort of state-of-the-art best practice in permitting that's attempting to standardize that a little bit throughout the country, and then we'll, as we said, move into the next what is around the corner on how we can streamline things even more with Solar App. All right, go ahead, next slide. So as was mentioned in the intro here, the soft costs associated with solar installations represent a significant portion of the total costs of a system. In fact, the majority of system costs today are on the soft cost side, and that actually hasn't always been the case. As the cost of solar has declined substantially over the last decade or more, the soft cost pieces have also declined, but they've been harder to address in some ways. There's been all kinds of technology improvements. There's been that have driven down the cost of each hardware component, and the prices of those have really fallen fairly quickly, much more quickly than the other aspects of the installation cost. The labor and really customer acquisition has been one of the biggest challenges. When you look at this and the breakdown, sometimes it looks the actual cost of permitting. It depends how you look at things to determine what that cost is. When you look at just the hours it takes to run down to the local office and apply for your permit, the time it takes to submit your application, maybe review it, and go and attend an inspection, that's a piece of it, and that's generally what's sort of captured in most of the research. We've been starting to look at the impacts that delays in that process can cause to the cost of the system, and we'll talk about this more in the Solar App. Karen will address this a lot more, I think. But any delays in this permitting process can influence a lot of these other areas as well, particularly on the customer acquisition side, as you start to lose customers who are waiting and waiting for days and weeks for the permit, and that can cause significant additional costs that are in this other area to be reflected in that permitting cost. So go ahead to the next slide. Here's just an example of that with from a relatively recent report from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab showing that the cost of solar in the United States is on average more than double that we see in a lot of other countries. United Kingdom, Germany, Spain, and there's the biggest factor that's tied into this is everybody throughout the world is sort of using the same source of modules, PV modules, inverters. It's a really global market in a lot of those areas. So the hardware that's being utilized is very similar cost in different areas. And so the biggest difference between these is the soft cost side of things. And there's certainly evidence that that permitting process does result in a substantial portion of the cost associated with solar in the United States versus some other areas where we have much more streamlined process for getting that permit and being able to do that very quickly and cost effectively, like you see in, again, the United Kingdom, Germany, Australia. Okay, go ahead, next slide. Here a little bit more, again, about that, comparing to Germany. It's a bit of an older study here, but it takes over 7 times as much time to submit a permit application in the United States to go through that process than it does in Germany, which is there they have a very simple online registration. You submit some basic information, you register the system with the Federal Electric Authority, and you're good to go. You can go install the system and turn it on. So next slide. And also comparing to Germany then, when we look at the cost associated with the permits, this would also include the actual fees associated with permitting, in addition to the time involved and the labor in doing that. We're looking at over 20 times the cost of achieving a permit, and this is just the direct costs. This doesn't involve all the other aspects of potentially lost customers and having to do the effort that was involved in that effort of it due to these permitting delays. And so SolSmart program has a number of these recommended actions that you can get different points for by implementing different things to encourage better practice, drive down these costs, and get more solar installed. And this encourages, it says transparency, streamlines it, and then we want to see more capacity installed so we can have better benefits from the increased solar. Go ahead, next slide. So the first prerequisite for any of the criteria is to have a very clear process published and available, so anyone wanting to install solar at least knows what they need to do. And that would be, putting a checklist up online that says, here's the steps involved, here's what you're going to need to submit, here's where you submit it, and how. So that's and many communities don't even have that at this point. So if you want to install in a town, and the challenge that is faced by many of the installers is each different town is going to have some different process, and it takes a while to figure out what that is and to remember what it is and go through it. So one of the things, as we'll get into the expedited process we're looking at here too, is trying to harmonize and standardize these types of processes from one community to another. That in itself helps solar installers to have a clear understanding of what they need to be and don't have to change things from one community to another. So the more we can get things, everybody on the same page in a standardized process, the better it is. All right, next slide. And so with that, like I said, the goal is to have a more standardized process implemented in as many communities as we can. And we will talk more about the best practices of Solar ABCs, which is an organization that deals with a lot of building codes and standards for the solar industry. The other thing would be to have a communication schedule here where you are in basically a continuous improvement process that you're open to. We want to see the communities being, we've got some recommended best practices, but also we've got, like I said, new ideas that are coming out, new technology that comes about. This is a fairly rapidly changing field, and we want to make sure that the process of permitting these systems stays up to date with that. And so on a regular basis, making sure that there's a process to engage the industry and consider how you can improve things. Like I said, adopt Solar App when that becomes available. So go on to the next. Requirement for the gold level certification is to put an online statement confirming that you're going to meet a 3-day turnaround time, so that installers know they're going to get reviewed quickly. They're not just sitting around and waiting for 3 weeks and have no idea when they're going to get the permit, when you're going to get around to it. That your community has identified this as a priority, and that when permits come in, you're going to get them done. You've got the staff to do that, or you've got a process to be able to handle any permits that come in and get those processed within at least 3 days. So that gets you to the gold level. One big area that can be improved on is the number of permits or the number of applications that are needed to get a permit. As we'll talk about, there's a number of steps involved in the permit process. There could be different areas, departments within the town that have different concerns that they're looking at, the fire department versus the building department, et cetera. So there's sometimes these different departments will require a different process or different steps involved. So what we want to see is make sure that we can do all of this through one permit, and ideally in the expedited process, it actually gets all done through one review. And that small systems, the basic criteria is we want to see them permitted within 10 days. The gold criteria is that you get that at least within 3. All right, go next. You get points for doing training of your staff around solar and how to permit solar and how to do that. So we offer training to people who are applying through the process, and we encourage, getting other training. There's lots of good training that's out there. There's a good online course by the Interstate Renewable Energy Council on permitting and inspection. And then also training for firefighters and the fire safety community in solar energy and storage systems, because there are different aspects that are in the fire code related to solar, and also how to, if there is a building with solar on it that does catch on fire, how to properly know what you're getting into and being able to respond appropriately. All right, go ahead. So quickly go through some of the permitting best practices. We touched on some of them already, and then go into that. So like I said, having one application is a key piece here. The general process, here, overview of the process. We start with the permit application, and as part of that is the plan review, and you have multiple departments that might be looking at that. So you can have, some jurisdictions have a separate electrical inspector from the building inspector, so they'd be different people looking at your structural building integration versus your electrical wiring and installations. Again, sometimes you'll have a separate review again then on the fire safety, so the fire marshal or the office may need to be involved to get that. And then also could be planning and zoning aspects of where solar is allowed, where it's allowed by right, et cetera, and some places where it may be potentially prohibited in a community. Obviously, we want to minimize that as much as possible. But even in Germany, you see, and Australia, you see examples where, certain historic districts and other areas like that, somewhat understandable that you would have some more requirements around what can be put in there and how. After the permitting and then the system's installed, you generally would have an inspection of the system to ensure that it was installed according to the permit plans. And then typically after that, you would have then approval by the utility before you can turn the system on. So that's the process. Recognize that some communities have different processes. Some don't have as much on the permitting side, and they focus more on the inspection. A lot of rural communities struggle with any of this, and certainly, more likely to have only one department that's going to be looking at sort of all building and electrical aspects. So we want to, we understand there's different types of scenarios out there. We have recommendations for, whatever your situation is. Go ahead, next slide. So the one key document to point to is the American Board of Standards, Codes and Standards for Solar, ABCs, is their expedited permit process. And this is really what we use as our primary guideline, what we're training people on now. And while it's starting to get a little dated, some of the code references are on an older code cycle. Those are fairly easy to handle in the update process. The overall best practices recommended here still apply to most communities that we're talking to. It is intended to streamline and simplify this process rather than really eliminate any steps or avoid the review that's needed here. And it's also intended to be flexible for the different types of situations that you encounter in different communities and how they handle the permitting. Go ahead, next slide. So we'll walk through this quickly. On the permit, what the guidebook here does is it says, okay, here's the things that you want to look for. Here's the things you should ask for in the permit. Again, our intent is to try to get a more standardized system in place so that you're submitting the same type of information from one community to another. So your general permit is going to have what is the size of the system, information about the location of where these components are being installed, who the installer is, and what their qualifications are. And so in this review, you'd be able to, by collecting this information, you then can do all of the reviews that are needed to be done. We start with a site plan that shows where the components are on the property. Again, it doesn't have to be to scale. Says, see a supplied example there. In the guidebook, you will find different examples for site plans, electrical diagrams, and actually the application itself. So very easy to adopt and use it for your situation. Go ahead and next one. There's electrical worksheet. So this takes basic electrical specifications of the equipment and fills that out in the form so that the reviewer has all the information they need to perform the plan check of the electrical components, make sure that the wire sizing's right, any breakers are sized properly, and then if you submit the spec sheets of all those components with it so they can check and verify those things. And actually, I want to say that this whole process is designed for certain criteria of systems. So generally, we're looking at systems that are less than 10 to maybe up to 15 kilowatts, because the components that are used and the designs that are used in these smaller type systems, there's certain minimum criteria that you look at, things that would qualify for this expedited process. So in the application, you'd want to check that it is of a certain size, the roof material that it's put on, the building it's installed on is structurally sound, et cetera. There's a few checkpoints that you need to check to make sure it qualifies for an expedited review. Larger systems, more complicated systems, systems that have line side connections, are going to need a little more review to look at and would not generally qualify for an expedited process. So you need to have clear criteria around what counts and what doesn't. But the key point consolidates all of this into one process. Really what we're looking to do is try to get rid of some of the engineering studies that may be needed too. On these smaller systems, it's just not cost effective to be able to do engineering studies, particularly in every single system that's submitted. And so we want to make sure that this process goes smoothly. The community has everything they need to review the project, and they can do so quickly. Go ahead in the next slide. And so create the checklist that has those eligibility criteria. So you make sure you know which can go through the simplified process. There's standardized plan sets that are available in there that have places you just fill in, the installer would fill in the component information, and you'd be able to easily, as you start getting application materials in a standardized format, it makes it easier on the review side as well. You know what you're looking at, you've seen one before, you do it over and over rather than getting different types of packages coming in from every different installer. Again, making this all available through the internet, making it as easy as possible, avoiding those trips to the actual permit office. So when the installer is having to run around to 30 different towns every week to get permits for the work that they're doing, definitely makes challenging versus being able to sit in the office and do most of the work from there in submitting stuff. And certainly over-the-counter review, so being able to if you do have to go on site, being able to get it done while you wait in a short period of time is good, but being able to do it through an online software in a short amount of time, and ideally, as we're going to talk about soon here, automatically through the systems that are being developed, that is the ideal here. Next slide. And I guess you have to click again. That didn't come through. All right, interesting. So real quick touch on inspections. I know we're not going into that, but this is the wrap it up here. After the permitting process is going to be the inspections. Inspections are really important too, and make sure you do some effort there to streamline that process. Somewhat similar things here. Make sure they know what you're going to be looking for. So publishing an online inspection or a checklist, so you know what you're looking for. Having more standardized criteria there for installers to understand, making it easier to schedule that, and making sure there's a quick turnaround on that. Lots of different things there. Coordination with utility is great. Speed up that process so you don't duplicate the needing to have multiple inspections. Being able to do these without the installer presence through virtual methods. There's a lot of other best practices we could talk about on that side. And one of the things through the streamlined process is, making sure that you do have a good inspection process on the end to ensure that the plans were met. And next slide. I think that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Richard. That was really informative and helpful. I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Karen Banker with Sunrun. She's a public policy manager next, so that we can hear more about the solar app as well. And then again, we'll have time for questions for both speakers after that. So Karen, you can feel free to take it away whenever you're ready.
Hi all, thanks for attending today. And Richard, thank you for the very informative presentation there. The SolSmart program is amazing and would encourage anyone on the call to look into it. So Solar App is a related effort that kind of takes some of the SolSmart parameters a little further, and I'll get into that in a moment, but we can skip to the next slide. So the Solar App campaign, Solar App, which stands for Solar Automated Permit Processing, is meant to address both permitting and interconnection processes in the US and to help bring down the cost of some of these processes. So, we see a much greater expense, as Richard explained, in other mature solar markets around the world. We see when we actually look at the direct and indirect costs, and the indirect costs have been studied less. We actually see a total of up to about $1 a watt difference between or from these soft costs that are caused by the permitting and interconnection processes. A majority of these soft costs that are indirect, so not rolling trucks or necessarily hours or even purchasing of some of the required components, is actually related to the delay side of the issue. And delays cause cancellations as customers grow concerned about what's taking so long, and they don't always know where the delays are coming from, and they're often quick to look to the solar company and put it on us. Whereas, we do our best to collaborate with our AHJs, and they're certainly working their hardest to process these applications, but honestly, solar has just taken over and dominated in such a way that it's overwhelming a lot of permitting departments across the authorities having jurisdiction in the US. And, we want to help do something about this. So, our intent is to streamline the permitting, inspection, and interconnection processes. Our goal is to reduce those costs from those processes, the soft costs, by about $1 a watt for residential solar and storage in the United States. And our solution for doing this that we have identified is to produce an online permitting portal to help our AHJs actually improve their processes, reduce delays, and become more efficient with the headcount that they already have. So let's move to the next slide. We have tons of incredible partners working on this with us. Some are listed here. We've actually grown this list even since we made it about, a few weeks to a month ago. But the main campaign collaborators are the Solar Energy Industries Association, the Solar Foundation, Sunrun, Tesla, and Mosaic. We're also working with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I'll explain exactly how. It's an exciting project in just a moment. And everybody else listed here. So these are some really incredible organizations that we have across the country and localized in California and other places that are helping us get this done. I want to point to the right side where you have the additional stakeholder engagement from the International Code Council, the Sustainable Energy Action Committee, the International Association of Electrical Inspectors. So we have a lot of groups both on the industry and the AHJ side joining us, recognizing that going online and digitizing permitting processes could be a really beneficial thing for everybody. So pretty cool. We can move to the next slide. This is describing a little more of what I was saying earlier. So defining what these direct and indirect costs are and what exactly direct and indirect means. So direct costs would be something like a permitting fee and the actual time and labor that it takes to go out to a site for an inspection, things like that, as well as interconnection fees. The indirect costs are more related to, what I was saying there with losing customers and doing some of the processing or some of the research related to exactly what we have to fill out in these applications, because every year we have the International Code Council publishing new rules, and every year then AHJs around the country are tasked with interpreting those rules and often come up with different interpretations. So we have to, as an industry, keep up with all that, make sure we're working with our AHJs and our utilities constantly, so that we know exactly how to handle some of the process changes that happen, and that takes a lot of time as well. So for every week of delay that we experience, either from a processing delay or an understanding issue or a correction, whatever it may be, we see a 5 to 10% cancellation rate. So pretty significant for just a single week of delay. And that's why, we're going to work on something that's actually going to create an instant permitting process and make it really easy for AHJs to do that. And the reason why this is so important is, as I've mentioned, these things inflate the cost of solar by approximately $1 a watt. So that would be $7,000 on an individual project. So you can see at the bottom here, we've got this nice little graphic that shows what we may accomplish over the next 5 years. So we think that that getting the cost of solar down by $1 per watt by reducing these soft costs could increase adoption by 2.4 million solar homes. We think that we'll actually see that $7,000 in savings per solar system on the customer side. So customers will start to realize these savings as we start to realize them because we pass it all down. And then we think this is going to create up to 30,000 solar jobs. So really important. This is why you've got so many big names on it. And this is why, it's really important for the future, because this is the difference between 2.5 million additional solar homes and not. And with the climate crisis in our face, I think every little bit counts. So next slide. So this is where I get to the really exciting part, and I get to describe our vision and specifically spell out some details regarding this online permitting portal that I was mentioning. So there are rules all across the United States that attempt to, at a state or local level, govern the solar process that both utilities and AHJs have to engage with in order to create their own grassroots level process. And in California, for example, online and instant permitting is required by state law, but we have seen a lot of AHJs move online and get closer to instant permitting, like the city of Los Angeles is a model for the rest of the United States and how they've achieved this. But it's very costly. A city like Los Angeles can afford to go online and implement instant permitting and build out a tool that makes them feel good about the compliance in every single application they receive in order to let it go on to install. But other AHJs don't. And there are a huge number of AHJs, specifically in the state of California, that really need help meeting the requirements of this law. So we've found that digitizing the permit process is the fastest route to savings and is going to help a lot of these AHJs get where they need to be. So we're going to create this web-based, open source, flexible online permitting portal that can be used anywhere in the United States at no cost to the AHJ. Solar contractors will pay a very small fee with every project in order to actually get these applications processed. And that amount will go back into the administration of the portal and the ongoing software development we might need. But what's really exciting about this online permitting portal is it's not just a vision anymore. We were actually able to get funding to build this thing. We have about $700,000 that was sent to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL, in Colorado to be our software developer and turn this thing into a reality. So this is actually happening. We've gotten a lot of buy-in, a lot of support, like I said. And one of the reasons why is because the DOE saw it. So really exciting, something we have not started to build yet. And one of the reasons why we're on this call. So on to the next slide. I've included some details here about the different types of portals that we're looking at that already exist, because like I said, this is not a novel idea. There already are cities across the United States that have created online and instant permitting. So that means as soon as you've filled out all the questions and paid your fee, the portal will actually send you a building permit. And I'm not going to go through these today because I know we're running out of time. So I do hope that you look through some of this information when you get the slides later. The next slide. This is another page or a slide I'm not going to fully go through, but it does describe some of the things and functionalities that we want this portal to be able to enable. So we do want this to work for residential, commercial, PV, and storage. But really, we need more participation on the commercial side to get that done. And we're going to need a little additional funding to really get storage involved in this, as well as hopefully future renewable energy technologies or clean smart home technologies like EV charging and smart water heaters and smart thermostats. We hope that one day this portal might be able to cover those technologies too. But today, we're able to guarantee that it's going to cover PV. So one step at a time. But I do hope, again, that you'll look through this so that you can actually get an idea of how much thought we've put into this and how we're going to start some of the conversations with the AHJs and the AHJ entities that are going to help us build and develop this thing and then deploy it nationwide. So good stuff there. All right, next slide. For everyone here on this call, though, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at our campaign materials. We just have these 3 memos that describe the campaign and some of the content that I've gone through here today. Describes some of the model solar permitting practices that already exist in the world, and then one that details exactly what we envision for the online permitting portal today. All of which can change as we begin this engagement through the Solar Foundation and through the Solar Energy Industries Association with AHJs, the International Code Council, etc. So next slide. For those of you on the call, I do know that we have a lot of mayors and mayor staff, and so I really want to encourage you all to reach out to us and let us know if your community is interested in advising the development of this online permitting portal. We're going to be working on it really in a lot of detail over the next 6 months. So this is a really good time to jump on board and make sure that your city's advice and thoughts are heard. Because, you know, after 6 months to a year, once this thing is built, there's going to be far fewer adjustments, far fewer things that AHJs are going to be able to change. But we do expect a very high level of engagement, given that we have some of these prestigious organizations like the International Code Council on our team. So please reach out. This is some of the information here. We can get you those one-pagers. We can get you on a list to help advise and take part in the National Renewable Energy Laboratory software development process. And then, of course, you may be the first city that gets to adopt this. So very exciting. One of the reasons this is so beneficial for AHJs, again, is that, think of it this way. Right now, AHJs are facing this flood of permitting applications. But there's a cancellation rate that is caused by a number of factors, One of which, though, are the delays that we face with these external entities that we have to run applications through. So regardless, these cancellations still require someone to look at those applications right now. So we have AHJs and utilities around the country, unfortunately, wasting a lot of time on the flood of essentially unsecured projects that come into their queue. So when an AHJ or a utility is able to run a quick automated compliance check on those applications and allow them to go to install and move some of their checks and their emphasis to inspection and look at a lot of the details they normally would before install there, they save time on ever having to look at any project that cancels, and they get to actually shift their head count to only the projects that actually become a reality in their jurisdiction. So you can consider how much more efficient an individual employee of an AHJ can be when they don't have to spend time on a project that might end up canceling down the line. So lots of other benefits for AHJs that we spelled out in some of our memos. This really is about the benefit to the AHJ, to our communities, to society, and to the customers that actually are investing in solar. And we think that we're going to succeed. So please jump on the bandwagon with us. Let us know that you'd like to be a part of this or that you just simply support what we're doing. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much. That's it for me.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. Thank you, Karen. And I want to emphasize both for the SolSmart program and for the Solar App campaign, we wanted to host this webinar today so that you all can hear about those opportunities and hopefully take advantage of those resources. So we record our webinars, and I'll be sure to share the recording and the slides with folks and help you get connected either with Karen or Richard or others in both organizations if you are interested in doing so. So just a couple of final quick notes before we wrap up here. Seeing no chats in the chat box at this point, feel free to throw them in if you have a question here in the last couple of minutes. But one other plug is that if you'd like to learn more about permitting and best practices in kind of a really simplified place, or other suggestions that we're putting out for communities interested in going solar, I recommend you check out the toolkit that I mentioned earlier, 10 Ways Your Community Can Go Solar. And then finally, this webinar has been part of a series for our Mayors for Solar Energy. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, or you're not yet part of that project, today is a great time to go ahead and get involved, and that'll ensure that you know about additional webinars like this one and other resources in the future. So you can head to this link, or you can just contact me directly to get involved. So that's all that I have in terms of wrap up things. We do just have a couple minutes, and I don't see a question yet, but I wanted to go ahead and ask one of either Richard or Karen. Feel free to answer. I'm just curious if there's one particular or really common permitting best practice that you feel like most cities aren't achieving on their own, and that is especially important to tackle first, whether that comes up in the SolSmart process or Karen in your work with cities and their permitting.
I'd say, one of the easiest things to do is just make sure that we know how to contact you and communicate with your team if there are any issues with our application. Again, I think pushing as much emphasis as you can to inspection versus the pre-installation process is really helpful. It doesn't mean that you're going to have to skip any kind of compliance checking or any of that. It just means you're shifting it to after install so that we're not blocking people from putting the systems on their houses when they're really anxious to get that done.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd say creating a more streamlined, standardized process for your residential, your smaller systems, and making it clear to understand what that process is the the helpful.
Right, absolutely, that transparency piece.
And on that note, work with your neighboring AHJs. Find a way to build a support organization across your region so that you all can give feedback to one another and work with one another to try and create not just a standardized process within your jurisdiction, but actually within your region, I've seen a lot of success with building official organizations in Southern Nevada and other places where I actually get to engage directly with some of my partners on the jurisdiction side. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's often true of regional partnerships and other aspects of solar and renewable energy too. So that's a great tip. Great. Well, it looks like we are at 4, so we've unfortunately reached our time. But I want to thank both Karen and Richard again for sharing some of your expertise with us today. And I'll be sure to follow up with everyone who joined us and make sure you have all the information and resources you need to follow up after this event. So thanks so much. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.